Okay, awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's panel with Lubbock ISD for the Strong Foundations Framework Development Grants. My name is Leslie Cuellar, and I am the H2IM recruiting lead at here at TAA. Some of you might already know me from emails or one-on-one correspondence. So we're excited to have you all here today. To get us started, I would just like to give a quick overview of the Strong Foundations and how this Strong Foundations Framework Development Grant sits within that. Strong Foundations is a comprehensive grant program written into statute with supports that are tailored to grant or to get more third graders to read on grade level. The Strong Foundations Math and Literacy Framework Development Grant is the first of the Strong Foundations to launch, and it will provide supports to districts in building the why behind instructional changes. So specifically, this grant will support districts in building out a research-based instructional framework, either in math or literacy, that will allow LEAs to streamline their instructional decisions that are rooted in their district's created and adopted framework. And so just to give a quick recap of the goals for the grant specifically, the overall goal for this grant is for a district or charter to develop a content-specific research-based instructional framework that is agreed upon and adopted by the district or charter. So districts in this process will receive funds to support a collective learning process that is focused on the research of how kids learn in math or literacy. It'll help provide them with change management and stakeholder engagement support. It will provide project management capacity for the process from start to finish. And also LEAs will get access to a suite of exemplars that they can then adapt to their local contexts. They will also be able to participate in a community practice with other LEAs where they can all share their successes and challenges and learn from each other as they are undergoing this framework development process. LEAs will also get the opportunity to receive priority and other grant opportunities that are aligned to math or literacy. So just to recap some of the upcoming opportunities that we have to learn more about this grant. So in addition to today's panel, we do have an upcoming panel in August that will consist of 3 districts. It'll be Aldine ISD, Emerald ISD, and Lubbock ISD. So you'll get to hear from 3 different districts who have undergone a framework development process. You also, if you missed any of our initial research overview series, we do have a couple more happening both in July and August. In fact, next week we do have math and ROLA. So if you missed out on those first initial sessions, you can go ahead and sign up for these next ones that are coming up. Also, if you would like to have some one-on-one time with one of our TA members, we are more than happy to jump on a call with you all to talk about your needs and see if this is the right grant support for you. So I will drop a link to our website, which contains all these upcoming opportunities, so you can check it out and sign up to any that you're interested in. Also, just a friendly reminder, we do have our early closing date happening in about 2 weeks on July 29th. So if you are ready and willing to submit an application, please do so by then. We also have a later deadline happening end of August. And so this is just the first grant option for districts. We will also open up another option later this year. So to go ahead and just give you all a brief agenda for today, Melissa Lautenschlager, who's joining us, she will be moderating our panel. She is the Director of Instructional Materials Implementation. She'll give some quick introductions of our Lubbock panelists, and then our Lubbock panelists will then go ahead and do their about 10-minute, 15-minute presentation on how they, on their experience of doing an instructional framework, and then we'll open up some questions for you all. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Melissa to get us started.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. And happy Thursday to all of you in this very hot weather. So hopefully you're staying cool today. Like Leslie said, my name is Melissa Lautenschlager. I work at TA and support instructional materials review processes, adoption, and implementation here. So I'm really excited to introduce you to 2 important panelists who are going to talk to you about their journey through developing this framework and what that means. Before I introduce those folks, I just want to share like my thoughts a little bit on why is this so important. I think as the last 2 years have been really, really challenging in education. However, education has been challenging for many years. There is no easy solution to the work that we do, and it is a constantly changing group of students, educators, and the field and the demands. But what I do know, what I've seen over the years is that in order to support people in larger changes, it really has to be rooted in strong why and a strong vision for what you are trying to accomplish. When we make quick changes without connecting it to that anchor and the importance and rallying teams around that, it is hard to sustain that change, especially when things get challenging, and they will. So I just want to share that before we jump into it. And I'm sure that Misty and Kim can speak more to that. But before we get into this, some things that they're going to talk to you about in their overview is just a little bit about the rationale of why they started this work, to build a new instructional framework, specifically looking at what were the conditions for success that were so important to this, and what are they continuing to build? How did Lubbock ISD build a committee that supported this work? Because it cannot be just a few people alone dreaming up the dream. You have to bring in the people who are doing the work on the daily. They'll talk a little bit about the timeline and how they put this framework into action, and then benefits from this. During this overview, I do encourage you, as questions come to mind, start putting them into the chat, and Leslie and I will begin to look at those, and we'll be able to explain that to Misty and Kim, and they'll help to introduce that. We really do encourage your participation as we go, and there'll be opportunities for questions after the overview. This is a really great place for you to ask those wonderings of how do I make this happen for my team or the work that we're doing. So please utilize these great speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Misty Reiber, who is the Chief Academic Officer at Lubbock ISD, and Kim Callison, hopefully Kim, I'm saying that correctly. All right, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. And they're going to talk to us about 10 or 15 minutes, but again, put those questions in so we can get started. So I'll turn it over to you, Misty and Kim, to start telling us about your journey.
That's great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Thanks for having us. We're excited to share. Kim and I are actually both sitting in different roles than we were when we started this process over a year ago. And so Kim was still on the campus as a principal and served on the committee. And I was sitting as the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and doing the design of the committee. So I want to talk you through some of that process, but also want to allow Kim that opportunity to share the perspective of what it was like being a part of the committee, and then in her new role where we're headed in the future. So we knew that in Lubbock ISD, like many of you, our reading scores were not where we wanted them to be. We have been a balanced literacy district for many years, and we have a teacher turnover rate that is growing exponentially each year. And we are looking at something even more significant next year. And so as we continued to employ teachers that have been with us for a few years at a time, and we lost some of that fidelity and that consistency in our balanced literacy program, we noticed that more and more we saw our kids struggling and getting further and further behind. And we had a framework that was a literacy framework that existed from that. It was 72 pages. We joked in a cabinet meeting that if we asked our executive leadership to find it, or they would lose their job at the end of the day, that we probably wouldn't have had anybody left. So it was an archaic framework that wasn't working, that people didn't reference. They didn't have a why. They just did whatever curriculum was in front of them. So we knew we were ready to make a change. We just didn't know where to go with the change. So we met actually with Aldine ISD for a number of meetings. They had gone through the leadership framework, or excuse me, the literacy framework revision the year before us. And they were very gracious to help us through that process. So we met together with a small planning committee that were central office administrators and said, what would it take to rebuild a literacy framework from scratch? And we knew that we needed buy-in in our district. We have master teachers that have used balanced literacy for a long time and are firm believers, both in our coaching groups and in our teaching groups. And we also knew that balanced literacy had a great place. It just wasn't working with the amount of training we could provide for teachers. So we did an open call committee and said that we would accept all principals, all coaches, and we extended it to our community. We invited teachers and we invited our college professors who are a large part of the teaching. Texas Tech is here. We get a large number of teachers from Texas Tech. We had 62 committee members. We also tapped some people to be part of our group, but we knew that we needed every person on our committee that said we don't need a change because we wanted to make sure that we had that buy-in and voice. And we built what we called a year at a glance for our committee. We met monthly it started out that we were going to have 45-minute meetings. And after the first meeting that went for 2.5 hours, we learned that we were going to expand that time. And what we did in our design is we took what the science of teaching reading and the elements that TEA has used inside reading academies and other pieces, and we studied an element each time. And each time we studied an element, we studied, here's what the state says, here's what research says. And we showed research from both perspectives, because if you know anything about reading, there's always two perspectives. We studied our data. And we studied what is reflective inside of our district. What does our current framework say? And we pulled out of those 72 pages and said, what does our current framework say? And with each piece that we studied, we then at the end of that session developed what we wanted our framework to say. What do we want it to look like in the future? What do we want to say that we believe about writing? What do we believe about reading? What do we believe about foundational skills? And we looked at all of those parts and pieces. And I'm excited to say that after a year of meeting, and we were pretty religious about meeting every month for those hours, our committee ended at about 52 members that were consistent. We ended with a one-page framework. And our one-page framework is now what we are using to have the foundation of our training, the foundation of our next step pieces, the foundation of our work with our universities. And in our last session, we took that one-page framework and we used it as a foundation to evaluate curriculum. And we laid out our curriculum choice that we were using last year that was part of the state adoption for reading. And we laid out Amplify and looked at the parts and components, and the committee voted. And the committee voted 96% in favor to switch to Amplify as a district. We had had 5 campuses that had piloted in the past. And now we are using it, or will be using it this next year in K-8. We believe that where we're going connects to the science of teaching reading, but it also connects to the situation of where we are with so much turnover in our teachers and having that opportunity to teach them. The committee did not agree. It was not easy peasy. There weren't moments where it was not kumbaya every step, but we debated and discussed. We gave updates to our cabinet. We gave updates to our leadership teams. Those principals gave updates to their teachers. And it was a neat way to have extreme buy-in from a large group of people that are very passionate about what they do and who believe in what they do. It was an exciting opportunity. I think we learned a lot. mirroring offer after Aldine, and I great respect and appreciation for what they did to help us, and then great respect and appreciation to TEA for the documents we were able to pull down and use. I want to give Kim a chance to talk about being what it was like on the committee, that principal perspective, and now she's sitting in that seat for what our next steps are in that next part of the journey.
All right, thank you, Misty. Coming from the campus level and participating in this committee, I was one of those that volunteered with the open call. Before being an elementary principal, I was the curriculum coordinator for reading and writing. And so this is my jam. This is what I do. And so I had kind of been through the entire process of moving through several different curriculums over the last 15 years in our district. Coming from the campus, what I noticed with what we were doing with balanced literacy is I had a few veteran teachers that were outstanding. As Misty said, they had been trained, many of them had gone to tech. They had that background. It was our new teachers, and more we were having new teachers coming in that maybe only stay with us for 2 or 3 years and then moved on typically to the Metroplex or a bigger area. And so that is where we were losing ground. I could not keep them trained fast enough or long enough to have that sustainability. I was also one of the campuses that after kind of getting into this work, we piloted Amplify, and it just meshed so well with our development of the framework. We were really looking at that research, looking at the resources. And so I had some of the campus teachers that were using the previous adopted material and some of them that were using Amplify. And as we had conversation around those critical pieces of foundations and phonics and what was meeting their needs as teachers and our students' needs, I could see the tide turning even on my campus. Whereas I had just a handful, I had 4 teachers that piloted it in 2 different grade levels. As we began studying the framework, and even though it was in development, I used a lot of that language as I worked with the teachers, and more and more of our RLA teachers got on board. And so by the spring, after we had developed the framework, the decision of the committee had been made that we would be using Amplify. I had several of my staff members that began to use Amplify towards the end of the year because they saw a change. They saw it supporting that framework that had been developed by the group. So it was very cool because, as Misty said, it wasn't kumbaya. She and our RLA content coordinator laid everything out. They had the different research pieces, and we had lots of opportunities to read, to process. Typically, we had some sort of little homework assignment of, just look over this. It wasn't anything extensive, but read through this prior to our meetings. And then we came together and had those discussions around what we had read and what the research had said. So that's kind of how the development happened, and that's how it impacted my campus.
I don't know if this is the part where we want to connect and ask questions. I know for us, we're really excited about this grant opportunity because our next steps are to talk about math. And we feel like we need some help and some guidance and some learning to get through those next steps. So we're excited to put in our application alongside each of you and participate in that same opportunity. Is it okay, Melissa, if we just read the questions?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do some, let's go ahead and answer some of the questions if you're comfortable with that. And then I have some additional questions too, but definitely want to hear from the field here.
Okay. I saw the comment first about the open committee. That was really important to us. We we knew we had a lot of training in balanced literacy. We have a university that supports that trains our teachers in that. We knew we had a lot of learning to do. And not minds to change, but we wanted to make sure that we had all the right people at the table. And we didn't feel like if we requested people at the table that we could get everyone that we needed. It meant we had a really big committee. And I'll be honest, planning for it and managing it was difficult. We had to use protocols for everything that we did and be very intentional and time stamped in what we did, but we felt like that was really important. Asking about our TAP or our DCSI and our TIP. We also are an SGS district with high quality instructional materials. So we had a few campuses that had already transitioned into that role. And so are transitioned into using new curriculum resources. And so we already had some opportunity to see pilots and be able to go out and see those new resources. And we spent the spring where almost every one of our campuses sent a leadership team and or instructional coach team that went out and reviewed campuses that were using those resources in order to see them firsthand. And that really helped us in that process. We believe that piloting really made a big difference in what we were doing.
And I think it made a big difference in kind of the mindset of need for change, because even my more veteran teachers expert reading teachers, when they went and watched and saw how it tied back to the framework we were developing, they were more on board. They were enthusiastic about it, and they were ready to make those changes as well.
In answer to your, did we see achievement or growth after this change? We're excited about growth. I know that we're not in an official space to talk about those things yet. Just waiting on official news from the state. But we're very excited about where we're headed as a district. We have not arrived. We're not there yet. And we know we have more to go. But we are excited about the growth that we are seeing. And we only finished the process and adoption in May of 22. So we have not yet had a year where we have rolled our framework or used our framework. We had training that started the end of May, where our framework is the initial part of what teachers see and the final part of what teachers see. But this next year will be our first year of framework and curriculum implementation.
Thank you for adding those pieces. I know one thing I just wanted to share is many of you know that implementation is not an overnight process and does take some time. So one question I have for you, Misty and Kim, as you're bringing in new staff and thinking about, like, there is going to continue to be transition. How are you thinking about how do we bring in those who are coming in new? How do we keep people engaged? What are you thinking about there to help keep that going into this next year and beyond?
Do you want to go, Kim? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that, as Misty said, we're implementing the training for the curriculum this summer, and that using that framework as part of that training. As we move into next year, we have 4 professional development days throughout the year that we have all of our teachers together. We call them content focus days. And on those content focus days, this will be kind of the stone in which we hold everything down. So the teachers will see that constantly. As I work with administrators and looking at curriculum and talking through curriculum, this is kind of our keystone for those conversations, our framework is. And so just consistently bringing it back up at our leadership meetings, at our teacher training, and utilizing it that way is how we're going to try to keep that momentum going. And then I think also because we're moving into a space where we'll be working on the math framework as well, we can begin to reference that literacy framework over and over again so that everyone understands this is what we use to make those curricular decisions, assessment decisions, and instruction decisions in our district.
If you could go back to the beginning, and you are, because you're going to start this with math, what are some of the things you maybe had wished that you had known there that you're now going to put into the work that you do with math as a learning from this journey?
It's a great question. Because on first glance, I think we're really excited about where we're going and how it worked out. Part of it may be confidence on our side. We began this journey without knowing where it would end, and genuinely didn't know what we would end up with. And that's pretty scary when you're leading that big of a group and that big of a committee. And we just had to trust that it was going to go somewhere and it was going to look right for Lubbock ISD, and that our research was going to match. There were some moments where we were 7 seconds ahead of our committee. And I would have loved a little bit more time to study and a little bit time to be more prepared. But I think in the roles that we serve, that's where we live. Sometimes is 7 seconds ahead, and we became learners alongside them. There was some benefit to that vulnerability, because when we stood up, we said, this isn't we're directing you somewhere, this is we're going to land together. And that was a good thing. Math for us, we have not as much history, if you will, in having, we don't have a current framework. So we're starting from nothing. And so having a little bit more support to get there, I think is going to benefit us, because we had enough resources in our back pocket in literacy that made it safe and okay. We don't have that in math at all, and that makes it hard. Kim, do you have anything else you would add to that?
I will just say that I hope that I'm more than 7 seconds ahead, because my background is not math. And so there's definitely going to be some learning on my part from the experts and looking at that research and really digging into it. So, but I do think that the way that we had to approach it with reading, because we did have some pretty strong voices that weren't necessarily all in the same spot. It was important that we had that open committee. It was important that we met frequently. It was important that we had those conversations. And because we've seen some success in that, we want to replicate that with the math.
So one of the questions that I'm seeing in here is just a little bit about understanding when we say a framework, what does that really mean? So maybe you could give us a little taste of what your framework has in it. And then I know people asked about sharing, but maybe you could also talk about how that process, and going back to the research, is kind of like the important part, to less about like the outcome, although that's important, but the process was really important too.
Yeah, so when we talk framework, we're talking theory and philosophy, if you will. Our framework starts, and we're happy to share it. My encouragement around that would be to make something your own, though, because it matters. Ours starts out in Lubbock ISD, we believe. And it has statements about what we believe about the way that students comprehend, the way that students develop foundational skills, the way that students write, the way that there is reciprocity between the reading and writing process. And so it is very philosophical in nature about what we believe about that theory and research, and it's grounded in the science of teaching reading. And we use that same research and that same, like Scarborough's rope and those pieces, that same basic foundation that you see in the reading academies and other pieces that are part of the science of teaching reading. I saw the comment about the difference between a scope and sequence. We also have what we call a year at a glance, or a scope and sequence. We have pacing calendars. Those are all specific and targeted to a piece of curriculum. They are designed to show the pace of that curriculum. What we talked about on our committee is that the framework stands alone from curriculum. because that framework, even if we switch curriculums and use something different, that framework is our foundation about what we believe about reading and writing in Lubbock ISD. The curriculum is the vehicle we use to try to help students understand that and to help teachers have lessons and ideas and activities, but the foundation stays the same. It's at the base. And it's something that we can say that this is how we do things in our system. And it was really important to us to establish that why and that framework separate from a curriculum conversation, because we want people to have that grounding, not in this is the curriculum we do, but this is what we believe about reading and writing. Because believe it or not, people add on to your curriculum that you pick at the district level, and they add all kinds of fun and exciting things. And as people add those things, we want them to make sure that all of that questioning and thinking goes back to the foundation of the why, and not just the what that we're using in the curriculum.
Very well said. So there's a little bit of questions here about like switching a little bit. Knowing you had a variety of strong voices on the committee, how did you develop meeting protocols to help you come to agreement?
So we have some funny stories about that. In the beginning, we did open seating, and everybody picked their favorite people and were with the people that they got along with. And so we had to learn to mix it up. We had to have a lot of protocols where you got up, you shifted tables, you had a different discussion. There were times that we used tokens, and you had talking chips, and we went back to our Kagan strategies. And so we, in our district, we use Kagan strategies, we use lead forward strategies. We tried to model those. We also use things out of the SRI protocol book. We laid out every type of protocol you can imagine and said, this is our goal. This is the purpose of this meeting. If this is the goal and purpose of this meeting, and this is what we want to do, what would work to make that function? So for each component, we had a protocol. So there was a component where they looked at 2 pieces of research. So we might do like the 5 A's protocol where they write out and take notes, and then, or save the last word for me, or one of those protocols to read. We tried homework. I know Kim mentioned that, and some of our diligent participants like Miss Callison did her homework. Others, we had to give 5 minutes to finish that work so we could all be on the same playing field. But we treated it like class or some of your best PD, that at the end, we wanted to be in a good space. We also had to be careful. One of the things we did that I think worked really well is at the end of each session, we took the old portion of our framework that applied to this portion of research and had every table rewrite that portion of framework in a Google slide based upon what they learned that day. We then took everyone's notations, consolidated all of that language, and then brought it back to the next meeting, and then used a protocol to evaluate that component of the framework. And then we voted on it, and when it was voted in, that component became a part of the framework. And we used that same rhythm over and over and over again to make sure that everyone had a voice. And that the nuance of language, we learned that out of the first meeting. When you put 62 English teacher type people in a room, math may not matter as much, but the nuance of language for these people, they were fighting over verbs and all kinds of things. And so we had to be really careful to make sure that it expressed what they intended for it to say, and it meant what they wanted in the end. So that was one thing I would absolutely.
And timestamp everything, because if you don't, you will have 45-minute discussion over one word in one piece of the framework. So at least with RLA people.
So that's going to be the benefit of math, probably, just coming from math science myself. Just one thing I wanted to share as Misty was explaining this very detailed and intricate plan and their processes. That's part of being part of the Strong Foundations grant is getting the support to help you go through this process, because it can feel daunting. This is obviously an amazing team, and I'm sure you all have that as well, but also like the time and what you're putting toward that. So just want to like plug again, part of being the Strong Foundations grant is to get support in these ways to bring your teams along. So MC, we've had some other questions, but I would wonder here as if you were to give some recommendations to the folks on this team, what are like your top 3 things that you would consider were most important and key to helping you go through this process?
I think probably, and Misty will jump in, but I think probably one of the most important to us was ensuring that everybody that wanted to had a voice. And so whether, and I know that might make the committee a little bit bigger, but we don't want anybody to feel like they didn't get to share what was important to them. So that, I think that's a critical piece.
And I know this may sound silly, but one of the first things I thought of when you said that is to calendar well. We ended up calendaring a pre-planning meeting, the committee meeting itself, and a post-planning meeting after every single committee meeting. And we did it for the full year. And we gave the committee the dates for the entire year. And it became important to people. They showed up. We stayed late. It was after work, but it was important enough to them that they were there. And I think with the rhythm of school, if you don't do that, you can realize it's October or November and you haven't made your next step, and it needs to be a little bit at a time. I don't think you can do it in one setting. People need to think, and they need to process, and they need to dream a little bit and feel like they have that opportunity.
So kind of coming back to this idea of connecting everything to the research, have you started with going into math, like where you're starting to think of, because we do have like math academies. It's a little different than reading academies, but just curious to hear, is there something you've done on your end or things that you wish you had access to help better support as you begin to jump into that next journey?
I think that honestly, that's why we are really excited about the grant opportunity, because I don't feel like there is as much, not necessarily knowledge, but it's just not as well known about the research behind math, and at least not with our teachers in our district. So really pulling in some additional research. And so we're going to have to spend some time having our committee members read and go through those learning pieces first. I kind of feel, as I've come into this role and kind of learning, there's a small group that understand the research and are knowledgeable and adept at that research, but it doesn't feel like it is as significant as on the reading side. So I think that's where we'll have to start. And that is why we're so excited about being part of this grant for math, because it will provide that guidance for us.
You know, one thing too on that Aldine did, and they had some external support when they did their process, is they sent out a Tuesday tidbit that was a research piece. We were able to incorporate those into our literacy committee. And then we had also done a book study around the knowledge gap already, and we're able to use that as a foundational piece. But piggybacking on what Kim said, I do think our teachers and our leaders are going to need more learning around math. And so having some external support with resources that can help us with some ideas like that would be really helpful. That's why we're very excited about this opportunity.
We're excited too. So that's a big part of what we've been working on and building. So going back to looking at like the most challenging steps, was there any point where you were like, oh my gosh, I don't know that we're going to get to an end point? And what did you do to like change that? Or were there any like specific challenges that you would just call out of something to plan for and be prepared for?
So we wrote out a year at a glance that, like we talked about, that had the different components that felt really good. And by the 5th meeting, when we're going through the next piece and we're doing foundational skills, and we've had a great fight about phonics, and it was really good. And our 1-pager is looking good. We felt really good. But we also knew, we wrote in our year at a glance, the next step was to evaluate our current curriculum and to evaluate all of our programming that we have and to use the plan. And that was hard. It was hard to take what people have and know and feel confident around, and to come back and say, and they picked it. They had just been part of the committee and the textbook committee, and they selected this, and to come back and say, maybe we need to make some changes. And for us, the changes that we're making are pretty large scale changes. And to push through that was hard, but we knew it was the right thing to do. We knew it was good, but it just, it's not easy. And it wasn't easy for the committee either. We had people on the committee that struggled, and they were the ones that have been our loudest advocates to make the change now, because they really wrestled with the problem and they didn't take it lightly. So I think if you're going to go in that direction where you use the framework to evaluate your curriculum choices, which I think is the right thing to do, just prepare yourself that it's a hard thing to do, but it's the right thing for kids.
Yeah, so I know we're talking about the framework, but one of the things that you got to was deciding and using new materials that are pretty significantly different than what you've used before. And that approach with teachers is probably really different. What are some of the like expectations that you're thinking about, and what are some of the support structures you're trying to put in place to guide teachers to move in that direction and change some pieces about their identity of how we feel as teachers, as creators, to move towards using these materials that you took time to select to reinforce the framework?
I was pausing to let you jump. Sorry, Kim. So we are doing we have training, I feel like, every single day this summer. So there's a couple of things. If we back up to the end of the committee, we created a training for principals that was why. Why are we doing this? What is the literacy framework? What does it mean? And what does it mean to switch to Amplify? And all principals turned that around on their campuses before school ended. We wanted our principals to be empowered to own that conversation, to feel good, to be the cheerleaders. We practiced, we talked about what it means to be excited about something, and people went out and really sold that process. Then we've trained teachers. We really have training almost every single day this summer, so that every teacher can come to Amplify training, and a small group can see those pieces. We also have developed what we call logistic FAQ and implementation FAQ. So Lubbock ISD is pretty famous for whenever we implement something, we do it the Lubbock ISD way. So the world says they're going to do it this way, and we always feel like we have to be a little different. So we took all of the components of the curriculum and have set and just have questions and answers, and what will that look like and sound like. And then Kim is doing small group training with administrators all summer to make sure that they feel confident around those processes, because it's different. And it is changing a lot of what we're doing in class. And then we have some great pieces coming around walkthroughs and components that we're looking through in campus walkthroughs, not to say you're doing it wrong, but to celebrate and help people be excited about what they're doing and what they're implementing for change.
One of the things that we did in conjunction with that at the end of the year, as Misty alluded to earlier, is we also had our pilot campuses, those principals, including myself, we had one of our leadership meetings where we had time that the other principals could come and kind of talk to us. How did we implement? What was the plan? What were the challenges? What were the celebrations? And then in addition to that, we had quite an elaborate visitation schedule. And so at my elementary school, I mean, we probably had visitors there for about a month and a half. We had visitors from other elementaries around the district, sometimes 2 and 3 days a week that were coming in watching. We were able to debrief with those teachers, and then they were able to go back and kind of share. And we were super honest about, I mean, it's not perfect and it's not easy. And but the campuses that piloted, it was a very eclectic and diverse group of campuses from all different socioeconomic status, all different neighborhoods, that type of thing. And so that enabled all of our principals to be able to kind of latch on to a school and say, okay, this school is similar to mine. I want my teachers to go watch them. And I think by the end of the year, we had almost every single elementary in the district, maybe all of them, and there are about 30 of them, were all had an opportunity and all gone and visited elsewhere. And I think that was a huge game changers, because we did have some teachers that came in with their arms crossed and they were ready to hate it and not like it and find everything wrong with it. But as they watched in a real classroom with real kids, with kids rolling around on the carpet while they were teaching, they realized, okay, we can do this. And so I think that was a huge game changer for the shift to this new implementation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'll just say, as part of this work with Strong Foundations grants, we're hoping to be able to build up places that people can go as well, because I think you have to see it in action and like see it, real kids, real classrooms, kids rolling around, and see how that interacts. So thank you for providing that. I do have a person, Madeline, asking about the technical assistance providers. And then maybe Madeline, if you don't mind coming off just in your question, I want to make sure that I can answer, and we could talk about to be able to get you what you need.
Okay, sure. My question really is about the fact that 70% of this grant goes to hiring a technical assistance provider. So I went to look to find out who these technical assistance providers are, and they're just now receiving training as well. So they're not very far ahead of the rest of us. So how, and I looked at their training and it's similar. So how do we go about choosing a technical assistance provider? I mean, we have our local region center, and then we have some people we've worked with in the past, but
Sure.
My concern is that they're not very, we're having to turn in our grant right away. And I'm a little concerned that the technical assistance providers are not very far ahead of us.
Yeah, so part of the work with technical assistance providers is also that these are many of those who are applying to this do this work elsewhere. So it's not that they haven't ever done this work, but we are providing them some specific training that is Texas specific, some TEA specific components to make sure it's connected to STAR redesign, some of the work that we've been doing here at the agency around research-based instruction, the working with both with work with math and with what's been done with science of reading. So they're going to go through specific trainings that we have that is like expectations to be a strong technical assistance provider, but this is not new work. And then I'll just mention that we've been working with the ESCs for the last 2 years, really with this work. So even though they might be going through some of these trainings too, they've been working side by side with TEA throughout this time period to really come along with us and help to support in this way. So I know that looks daunting that they're just getting, but it's more about selecting them based on their previous knowledge and their ability to like meet these assurances and go through these trainings. Leslie, anything else you would add there? Great.
No, it's great. Thank you so much, Melissa.
So we are getting close to time. So I just want to first say how incredibly thankful I am. We call him Misty a lot and always willing to come and answer that call. But I think it's critically important for you to hear what's really happening in the field and not just the vision from TEA sometimes. So thank you, Kim and Misty, for just being honest about the process and that it is messy, but there was a lot of thought and design, and we really appreciate from learning from you. I know a couple things that I really took away that I hope others are hearing and why applying to the grant might be really helpful. One is having that connection to the research, especially around math and supporting what creating a framework looks like in connection to what you've been learning through the reading academies. The other part is just being open to being with your stakeholder group and ensuring that you are getting, being intentional about who you're bringing in, but also being open and welcoming to others so that it is like a transparent, inclusive process and how much that will take you further. And then this idea of holding the time sacred, and by creating a strong, well planned out calendar and making it that time is important and holding to it, will also begin to get to when it gets challenging during the school year, and it will, that you're remembering to go back to this because it is at the core of all that you are working on and changing. So those are some things that I took away as great things. Misty, Kim, anything else that you would want me to really call out as part of this process?
I really don't. We appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate being part of it. And we're grateful for the learning that we're doing as well. So thank you all.